дымки различные и так далее. И все это дело мы добавляем сами. Ну, то есть мы нажимаем создать новый уровень. Тут была туева куча всяких настроек, я решил вообще в них не разбираться, просто прожал все, что можно было. И получил вот такую, типа, HDRI-карту окружения, да. Тут и так далее. Мы сразу видим, как падает освещение. Как вы могли заметить, тут нет как такового Solid мода, то есть мы сразу видим, как падает освещение, какие текстурки объектов, дымки. Окей, мне нужно и слава богу, потому что я-то думал, что придется. Так, окей, мне нужен чистый лист.
Ой-ой. Хуяна. И как выйти отсюда? А где эта штука-то? Я ее закрыл как-то случайно. Вот это вот где?
Ну или темный. Так, а
Тяжело.
как тут... Где...
Тяжело.
Как вы могли заметить, тут нет как такового Solid мода, то есть мы сразу видим, как падает освещение, какие текстурки объектов, дымки различные и так далее. И все это дело мы как падает.
Да.
Как вы могли заметить,
Получается, наверное, да, бля. Блять, это не то вообще. Бля.
тут, как тут...
Да, он
Так,
нужен.
окей, мне...
Косые скрыть.
anything else except come here to the Manage tab, and under the Manage tab you should see a spline option here. Once we've chosen the spline option, we can go ahead into our viewport here and hold down Control and click to create our first spline point. A spline is actually a sequence of points that tangents, which is a way of just saying we just have points and a curve calculated between those points. So by holding down Control and clicking, we're able to actually add those points to our landscape and it'll snap directly to the surface. So I'll hold down Control and click again over here and we can see we've started to make this curved road shape. And right now it's going directly through our landscape, but don't worry, we can always adjust that later. So this is good for now. I can always come in here and edit the shape of this road a little bit by selecting one of these points and moving it around. Like this point, I can raise it up a little bit. What I can also do actually is come over here to the spline tool on the left side. We have this option here that says deform landscape to splines. This will adjust the shape of the landscape directly to the spline that we've drawn with this tool, or all the splines that we've added to our landscape. Just to be safe, we may have other splines in our level somewhere. Just go ahead and use the select all option to select all the segments that we have as part of just this spline, and then go ahead and choose only selected here, and this will morph our landscape to the spline that we have selected. Fixes a lot of our intersection problems. And we can go and additionally make changes like raise the road up here, and go ahead and do that again. Select your segments and then deform only to this spline, and we can see it actually sculpts this landscape around our splines. So this is great. Now we just need to make some meshes to spawn along this curve so that it actually has a road mesh, because we don't want to do this in a material. In this case, it makes more sense to actually spawn mesh along the curve that will represent the actual road. What we can do is use the modeling tools that are built into Unreal Engine to create our own piece of geometry to extrude along this spline. I'm going to switch over to the modeling tools now, and if you don't see this modeling tools as an option, you just need to enable it as a plugin. So I'll come to the edit drop down, come to plugins, and type in modeling, and this is the option that we want to make sure is enabled, modeling tools editor mode. Go ahead and check that on and restart the engine if you have to, but I'm going to switch over to the modeling tools when I have it, and we can see that the curve still exists in our level. We just haven't made any meshes for it. Just leave it how it is for now. What we do want to come over here and do is come to the create button, so we can create a new mesh and choose the box option, and I'll just go ahead and click somewhere in the level to add it. That's roughly where our road is. If you don't see these settings, I'll go ahead and zero these out so they're starting from what you'll see. In your level, but what I'm seeing here is a width of 100, which I want to increase because I want this to be a bit wider, and a depth 100, which I also want to increase. And I don't need the height to be quite as high for this road, so I can go ahead and lower it. And these are all the settings that will be applied to our mesh when we actually go ahead and hit the accept button here, which will go ahead and create that mesh in our level and in our content browser. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that it has some depth to it, some width to it. So now I also want to make sure that I have enough subdivisions. This is really important. This is the reason we're creating a new mesh for ourselves, because when it uses a mesh and spawns it along the spline's curve, it needs some subdivisions, which are basically how often the mesh is separated and how much geometry is used to create the shape. And so when we curve that along the mesh, we want to make sure we have enough geometry to support that. Otherwise, when it curves, it'll just kind of look jaggedy or just straight, even if it doesn't have any subdivisions. So we want to have enough subdivisions so that when it curves, it has a nice smooth shape to the mesh. So we can go ahead in the width and depth here and maybe add 30. Might be overkill, but you can try out some different options for you depending on how bendy your road needs to be. And for the height subdivision, we don't need that much, but I'll just go ahead and add 3 in to be safe. So we've divided it 3 times in height and 30 times in width and depth, which again might be overkill, but you need to test it and see how much you can get away with, because we do want the shape of the road to still be smooth in these curving areas. Once I have that set up and I'm happy with it, I'm going to actually go ahead and add a material to this mesh. We can go and download a road material straight from Megascans that we can use here. I'll just come over here to the plus button and go to the Quickshell Bridge library, and we'll type in road. A quick and easy way to get to the road materials that have dashes on them, lines on them, is just to type in road and then American, and that is what they've decided to name this particular road material that we can use. So I'll go ahead and choose this one and go ahead and download it, which I've already done, and add it to my project. So now this material, what we can do is go ahead and drag it onto this mesh, and we can see this looks pretty good, and so this is the segment that's going to be spawned along our curve. We can also add this material later, but it just saves a step to add it at the creation process. So now when the mesh is created in our content browser as an asset, it will have the material applied. We can go ahead and hit accept now, and this mesh has been added to our content browser, not just our level, which is something cool about the modeling tools. So I'm going to close the modeling tools for a section by switching to the selection option. And the place you will find the mesh you've just created is under the folder that has your level. You'll see a generated button. In that generated folder, you'll probably see your name or whatever username you've used to log in. And there you will find all the custom meshes that you've made as part of your project. And we can see here that this new road mesh here has been added here. And if we haven't added the material, we can just go ahead and double click on that mesh to open it and add the material in the slot up here. So now we have this mesh. We can go ahead and switch back to our landscape. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and delete this one in our level before we switch, because it will not be able to select and delete it after we switch over to the landscape mode. So I'll go ahead and hit delete because we don't actually need to in our level anymore. And I'll come over here to the landscape options and switch back to it. And we're snapped back to our spline editing mode here. What I want to do is go ahead and select all segments again. And the reason we want to select all segments is because each segment and point, which is what these are called. So these are called points, and these segments are the surfaces or curve that's attached in between those points. Each of these could technically have their own separate mesh. We want to select all of them so that we can add the road mesh to all of them and not just one. So now that we have all the segments selected, we can come over here on the right side and scroll down in the details panel till we come to landscape spline meshes. And we can hit the little plus button here to show a new input for meshes. So index 0 here, and we can expand that. And this is where we're going to add our road mesh. And this is our road mesh that we just made, and we're going to drag it in to that input. Okay, so this is what we're going to see probably by default. Yours might line up correctly with the spline, but more often than not, it's actually kind of pointing in the wrong direction. So that's easily fixed here in the mesh settings by coming here to the forwards axis. This is kind of the axis that the mesh thinks is forwards. So if it's X, it's going to point this way. If we switch it to Y, it's going to switch 90 degrees. So we can drop that down and switch it to Y, and we can see that it switches our road 90 degrees. trees. So now our road is looking much better. We can also adjust it in positioning slightly. If we want to push it down into the ground a little bit, we can come over here to the center adjust is going to push the road up or down. It's the second number that goes up and down. So we want to go and type in negative because we want to push it down. Type in negative 10. And that pushed it down a little bit, but not enough. Let's try negative 30. All right, there we go. Now it has been pushed down into the ground for us, and that looks a lot more natural. Another thing we probably want to do is that our mesh is being stretched out to the full width of the segments that are spawned in between the spline points, but we can always switch that off by coming to the scale by width here, checking that off, and that will collapse it back down and not stretch the texture quite as much, because we made a square tile, so we don't actually need to stretch it even further out. So that's the basics of spline road creation. Now we want to probably think in some cases about adding a mesh along the side of it. For example, a curb or a sidewalk, depending if you're inside a city where there's walkable areas. That is something that is a little more tricky to add here because this spline is not easy to duplicate and move to the side. What we can do is go ahead and create a new spline actor along the side here. So we can come back to our spline tool, make sure it's selected, and come over here and hold control. And so as long as we're far enough away from the point so that it knows it's not the same spline, we can go ahead and make a new spline. And we want to make sure that this existing spline is not selected. So sometimes I like to switch onto another tool here and back, and then I can come over and hold down control and make a new spline point. Otherwise, sometimes it thinks it's part of the same spline and will loop it back around. Let's go ahead and draw some splines along